So I recently sat down and I realized something that hit me in a way that I honestly wasn't really prepared for, right? If the average lifespan, let's say, is 76 years in America, that means you got about 27,759 days on the planet. And when you just say it like that, it sounds crazy. You have less than 30,000 days to live. Most of us, if we're lucky. And at 45 years old, you might be thinking what I'm thinking. Well, I'm past middle age, right? In average lifespan years. So that means I've lived around 16,400 days. That leaves me with less than 11,323 days to live on average if I'm lucky. And you might be like, what the fuck did I just click on, bro? Like, this guy's talking about mathematics on how many days you have left to live. Like, what are you talking about, man? So I'm going to relate it to CPTSD. You just got to give me a chance, okay? So when you grow up with CPTSD, you already feel like time is running out and time was stolen for you, especially if you lived through childhood trauma and childhood abuse, right? It's suddenly you realize, you know what? I only have but X amount of days and I don't have all this time that I thought I had to get my shit together, right? And so you start to look at life in a much different light. So when you grow up the way I did, losing both parents by the age of 10 to addiction, crack, heroin, their drug of choice, right? You learn that real early on that life does not slow down for your pain. It doesn't care that your parents died. It doesn't care that you're an orphan, right? You learn fast that the world does not hit that pause button because you're scared, you're hurting, or you're confused. And it's pretty fucked up. I'm not saying that lightheartedly, but that's just the way life is, and that's how the world works. No one knows what kind of pain you're going through, and if they do, they only give you but so much amount of time, and then you got to figure it out on your own, even if you're 10 years old. And so early on in life, I learned that I'm either going to figure it out or I'm going to get swallowed alive. And now being 45, I realize I'm more than halfway through my life. And I want to talk about 5 biggest lessons that I learned. So the first lesson I learned is that no one is coming to save you. I learned that at a very early age. When most kids are learning how to tie their shoes, I was busy burying my grandmother, my father, and my mother. When I was 10, I lost both my parents. And then a month later, I lost my grandmother. So I remember looking at this and realizing, yeah, there's no Calvary coming to save me. It's just me, the group home, and people who are working 8-hour shifts that come and go, and it's just me. So as painful as that realization was, it was also the beginning of my strength and transformation, because once you stop waiting for someone to come fix your life, you start stepping into your responsibility that's shaping you as the own hero to your own story. Now, as messed up as that sounds, having to learn that at such an early age, many times CPTSD survivors, we get caught in this pattern of there's a superhero coming to save us. But once you realize that you're the superhero in your own story, life literally transforms and you can actually start to heal your trauma. And the second thing that I learned is that letting people in is a survival skill, even though it feels dangerous. So growing up alone, it taught me that I had to depend on myself, and I was super hyper resilient, super hyper vigilant. So I was able to scan any freaking room I walk in like 2 seconds. But that also taught me how to shut down my emotions, because people weren't safe, situations weren't safe, and safety back then wasn't an option. And so the truth is that isolation becomes a habit. It feels very familiar, it feels very predictable, and your nervous system, all it wants to do is keep you alive. So what is it going to do? It's going to lean on that old programming that once kept you alive. So what I learned early on is that the right people cannot enter your life if you lock yourself inside, right? So if you lock yourself from the inside, how are people going to come in from the outside? It doesn't make any sense. So healing required me to learn how to trust in very small doses, how to let people see who I am, right? And not be ashamed of it in very small doses, and how to let people see me without assuming that they will leave me in very small doses. Another thing I learned is how to accept support without feeling weak. Letting people in is not just a weakness, right? It's actually the oxygen that we need in order to survive and be part of a social structure, because we're not tigers, we're humans. And the third lesson I learned is that you have to actively heal those injuries that you did not choose. And to me, this is probably one of the most fucked up lessons you have to learn, because unlike other clinical disorders, trauma actually comes from an X factor, a person or persons or situation causing trauma to you, especially prolonged complex trauma. So that trauma itself, it doesn't disappear because you get older. In fact, it actually starts to get hardened and wired into your nervous system if you don't try to resolve it. And you might think, bro, that sounds like hocus pocus, but neuroscience will actually beg to differ. It shows that repeated childhood trauma rewires the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex, right? And it affects how we respond to threat, how we emotionally regulate or dysregulate, and how we sense other people in our environment, mostly hypervigilant, and keep people away because people and circumstances are dangerous. So if you don't work on that, right, if you don't work on your healing, those injuries end up shaping every relationship, every decision, every reaction and action that you have in your life. So I had to learn about therapy. I had to learn about nervous system regulation. I had to learn how to exercise, not just to change my body, but to calm my nervous system and my mind the freak down, because I was always hypervigilant, always scanning for danger, always thinking that there was a threat right around the corner, when in reality, there wasn't. And like I always preach to my clients, is healing becomes a practice, not a moment, right? You don't get to day 955 and go, oh shit, I'm healed. No, you practice that day in, day out for as long as it takes. Maybe the rest of your life. For some of us, we have to practice that day in, day out because of the developmental trauma that we had to endure. But a good way to think about it is something that you have to show up consistently, because if you think about it, trauma itself always shows up consistently, no matter if you want it or if you don't want it. And most people don't want trauma. So you can't heal what you refuse to look at. As hard as that sounds, it's not meant to be hard or judgmental. It's just meant to be observant. And the fourth thing I learned is that if you do not learn how to feel your emotions, they will find a way out of there. And most likely, they're not going to be good. I grew up feeling numb. I grew up in survival mode. I grew up believing that the emotions that I was feeling were distractions. They were weakness, right? They weren't signal. And so when I finally allowed myself to feel everything, I mean like every freaking thing that I buried inside when I was 0 to 10 years old and growing up in group homes and homeless and all this stuff, that sadness, that grief, that anger, the loneliness, the confusion, the emotional just spiraling that I had locked away, it just came rushing in. And I was like, holy shit, I didn't know that at 32 years old, I still felt like I was a 7-year-old child. But the truth is that numbness is not strength. It's your body protecting you because you were not safe enough to feel back then or escape your abuse, your trauma. But in adulthood, you have to learn that in order to heal, you have to feel, and you can't feel shame. And I'm not talking about just going into it and talking about, the worst thing possible in your life. Somatic healing, EMDR, things of that nature, they walk you slowly through the process. They don't just throw you in the deep end. So I had to learn to cry without shame. I had to learn to express myself without fear and realize that I have emotions, and emotions, they're not threats. In fact, those emotions were messages to my body, my brain, that, hey, we're trying to heal and we need to heal for decades now. And last but not least, the fifth lesson I learned is that the most important thing, right, is that you have to be able to hold two truths at once. Oh my God, I preached that so many times in my sessions. You have to be able to hold two truths at once, right? I can love my parents. I could have needed to be loved by them as a child, but I wasn't. And I still acknowledge the fact that they hurt me, and they hurt me deeply. And now they're dead, and there's nothing I can do about that. So you can be grateful for your resilience, and you can still mourn the childhood that you never had. You can feel strong and broken at the same time. Hello, world. You can feel proud and you can be scared. Hi again. Healing is not about choosing one truth over the other, right? I'm a traumatized basket case versus, hey, I'm a saint and I'm healed now. Healing is all about making room for all of that stuff. When I learned that two truths can coexist, I stopped feeling like I had to erase every part of my traumatic history and validate another part of, I'm going to just heal. I stopped feeling like I needed to pick a side. And so in turn, I learned how to honor my past, but I learned how to honor the future that I'm building. I allowed myself to be a whole freaking human being instead of just walking survival strategy zombie that just never felt anything, or I had to feel one or the other. That's not realistic. Now, this is where it all comes together. When I think about the 11,323 freaking days that I might have left, I don't panic at all. I stopped wasting time. I stopped putting off my healing. I stopped pretending that I had this unlimited amount of time to make these changes, because every day it does matter. Every day is another chance to break a generational trauma pattern, right? Every day is another opportunity to become the man that I needed when I was a child. Every day is another moment to be present with my kids in a way that no one ever presented to me. But that's okay, because every day is a reminder that I already survived the hardest parts of my life, and everything from here is just growth. So yeah, CPTSD absolutely steals the fuck out of many years from a childhood, from a developmental standpoint, from every aspect of relationship building, it just takes that away. It stole my innocence, it stole my safety, it stole my trust, but it did not get to steal the rest of my life, the rest of your life. And understanding that, how many days that I might have left, it gives me a sense of urgency and a way to say, you know what? Let me remind myself that this life is short, but healing is possible. And I may have a little more than 11,000 days left, but I have a lifetime to try to heal myself. And that reminds me that I can build a life that makes it a little easier for my 10-year-old self to be proud, for my children to look back and be proud, because everything that I had to go through and live through, it wasn't in vain. It was for a purpose. So you and I may have not chosen our beginning or our trauma, but we absolutely get to choose the rest of the chapters. And that is more than enough to write your own chapter. So what are you doing, guys? Let's get to writing your chapters, because yeah, you got to write your chapters of healing, because who's going to write them?
Silent Mind said, I have to start writing my chapters of healing.
Yes, I get that, but we are at the gym. Can we finish here first, Miss Chapter Writer?